Hi! No, you probably weren't expecting us on a Monday morning. I mentioned on Thursday on our show as we went out, which was an hour and 6 minutes into the show, so if you missed it, I apologize. I know we might have a little bit of a late arriving crowd, but we're moving our show to Monday today, and I said because reasons on Thursday, because it wasn't officially public yet, but it is now. Jim Knowles is meeting the media tomorrow. So I don't like to do a live show and then have to go and give you the Jim Knowles stuff on the same day. It just is too much. So we're doing this today and that tomorrow. I love off seasons when everything just gets jumbled around and people don't know what to expect, but I love the fact that people are here. Our regulars are in and filtering in, including Nate Bauer. And by the way, if you're late, so is Fitz. He'll be here in a minute because he's being a good neighbor. So Nate, welcome to the show. How was your weekend? And what's going on in the Nate Bauer brain complex up there, other than the coiffed hair you got going on, which I like, by the way.
No, it's terrible. The haircuts are on like a pretty regular schedule, but it's an appointment thing. And I'll be honest with you, the Fiesta Bowl and Orange Bowl kept pushing them off. And then my barber, shout out Lucas, had a kid. And so now it's just out of control. It's not what I'm going for, but hey, here we are. We're going to make it.
Yeah. You
don't have any hair. So
I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. A year ago, I finally threw in the towel. It's like basically the anniversary. So, no, you're in your 40s and still have a full luscious head of hair. With, by the way, like you don't dye that at all. That is all natural. And I just that's a shocking thing. I already have like the ghosty wisps of age in my beard. And I think part of it is I do believe mentality is a part of the aging process. And as you can tell, I'm a pretty intense person. So this is all accelerating as opposed to Nate, who likes to golf, hang out, shoot the breeze, have conversations about stuff, and have a good time. So
are you calling me a child? Is that what's happening?
No, I'm saying
I am.
Youthful is a compliment. Childish would be an insult. And I don't see childish. Fitz, like I said, Fitz will be here in a second, but we're going to start. Oh, no, Nate, you and I were a person for a second. Somebody's going to be in the comments telling us that we got to get to football. Let's talk about Jim Knowles meeting the media tomorrow. And it's going to be an interesting situation. Things that you don't care about is not going to be at the Beaver Stadium media room. It's going to be, with the stadium renovation, all of this is going to be a little bit awkward for everybody from just a formatics perspective. So I'm interested to see everyone jammed into the new media space and how that's going to go. Because I feel like in these situations, the energy around a thing is directly proportional to the number of people there from the internal part of this. But beyond setting the scene, what do you expect? What do you want to learn from Jim Knowles tomorrow when he speaks to the media?
I'm glad that you said that. First of all, I know you said, I know you don't care talking to the audience, but I didn't realize that. So now I'll go to the right place, which is, that's a bonus. What am I looking forward to? Look, he's going to be pressed on leaving Ohio State. And I think that he's not going to indulge that, to be honest with you. Right. Everybody has their reasons and closer to home, I would anticipate is right where he grew up in Philadelphia. I think that'll be something that he leans into. I think he'll lean into the opportunity that he sees at Penn State, right? I think this is going to be right. This is the kind of stuff that I love because it interests me from a barometer scale, right? Of where is the program, right? Where in this trajectory, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. Where is this on the scale? And the reality is when, yes, the salary for sure, of course, compensation is a huge piece of any of these equations. But also all of these people are professionally driven. So for him to have made that leap and sought out, right, a landing spot that he felt gave him an opportunity to succeed at the highest levels. I think that's significant. I think that's a significant litmus test of where this program is, not only in terms of the lengths it's willing to go to land a top coordinator, but also to be appealing to a top coordinator, to be right. This is his choice. It wasn't a trade, right?
Right. To phrase it another way, Penn State has a similar opportunity to win at the highest level to Ohio State, that they are on equal footing in the mind of Jim Knowles, not necessarily from what the media perceives or any of those things, but that Penn State is a place where you can go and win. And that's kind of what you're driving at here is what I'm trying to ascertain. When it comes to the I guess I'll just get into what I'm curious about. I want to know all the things that Penn State fans want to know, essentially from the people that have been following along at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I've been doing my best really to break down the understanding of Jim Knowles' defense and how it operates. And I think the biggest change specifically is in the front. Now, people have brought up the secondary, and I can get to that in just a little bit if you have any questions about that. By the way, the BWI Mailbag coming up at the end of the show, which is going to be more like the middle of the show because it's a good time to get your questions here. So if you've got any, put them in the chat. The front, to me, is the biggest change because there's some things they do in this defense, talked about it last week, that I want to know, how are they going to bridge the gap, and or are they going to do, like I called it with Andy Kolnicki, the full Kansas? Are they going full Oklahoma State, or is this iteration of Jim Knowles at Ohio State an evolution of what he did there? And I understand that those two conversations, Nate, in my mind, are linked. The one you said about Ohio State, Preston Wiley leaving, all those things that we alluded to during the hey, he's the defensive coordinator now story that we did last week, about a week ago. But from the X's and O's perspective, there is a very clear trend going away from the full implementation of what got him hired at Ohio State to where he was in 2024 when he had one of the best defenses in the country, won a national championship. So what version of this are we getting? And that kind of sets the table for the expectations of translating talent into scheme, and also how much do they have to learn? And that is, to me, when it comes to the big picture, that's the front. That's the personnel and where they line up along the defensive line and at linebacker.
Isn't a big part of this, part of what we talked about last offseason, even with Andy Kolnicki and Tom Allen, the concept that you talked about of doing more with less as being how guys elevate and progress in their careers, right? Mm-hmm. You're at places that can't get the type of athletes necessarily that, Ohio State can, that Penn State can. And so, and how do those guys tweak their identity when so much of what they do and the reason they're singled out for their success is because they're doing it with players who might not be elite, right? Who might not have the physical intangibles that some of the guys that you can recruit at the highest level. So just jumping on your point, if it had been a transition from Oklahoma State to Penn State, then I think that's the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. From Ohio State to Penn State, I'm not sure it is, right? Right. Because except for the smoke of him not being able to do exactly what he wanted to do under the previous coaching staff, right? So, Ohio State, it would be a hard argument to say that Ohio State does not have, at every level, the best defense in the country this past season. Is that right? So I think that there's a lot of qualifications to that. Final output and talent are different, right? So those are two separate conversations. I don't think you would say they have the best defensive line in the country from a talent perspective. And what I mean is that JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, good players, not necessarily lock fire first round picks. Tyleik Williams, we got a conversation there about maybe he's a first round pick.
In the secondary, Caleb Downs, one of the best safeties in America. But, Denzel Burke didn't play to the level of expectation throughout his career at Ohio State. So talent versus what they were playing with, I think you make a good point there that they were able to maximize all of the really good pieces and turn it into a defense that was playing some of the most sound football, I'd say, especially in the front last year when it comes to their ability to produce and to maximize their talent. A lot of guys that reached their ceiling. And that is what kind of drives this particular conversation, what the first part of the show is all about. Penn State returned almost all of its draftable talent that could have gone. We've talked about this, how important this is. They're the odds-on favorite, I think, right now. They've been predicted to win the college football playoff national championship next year by 1 or 2 outlets already. Way too early. That means nothing other than the expectation is they should be back in the playoff. Can they do that with a new defensive coordinator? So part of the conversation, Nate, and I'm taking a long time to set this up, but last year we talked about fitting the coordinators into Penn State's culture and having them work through their language in their playbook to translate it to Penn State. If you're paying a guy more than anyone ever in the history of assistants in college sports, more than, and shout out to Landon Tangwall for having this stat, more than anybody but the 2 defense coordinators in the Super Bowl, are you telling him that he has to do the same? Are you? Do you think?
Maybe a little. I don't think. Did you do that with Tom Allen?
Yes.
Okay.
They did. Yes.
Tom Allen didn't have to work. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to come to Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
He got paid $16 million to not coach at Indiana. So I find it unreasonable to say that anyone coming in, right, no matter who it is, that you lose the sense of collaboration, that you're dropping, that it's my way or the highway 100%. There's no conversation. This is just what it is. I don't see that. And I'm not saying it has to be necessarily, this is what we do, and so you do now what we do. They're a blending of sorts, and it may lean toward the coordinator's side for sure. But I do think that the notion of entering into like college football programs aren't NFL programs still. Right. Transfer portal changed things. There's a lot of things that have changed dramatically in college football for sure. But when it comes to player acquisition, you're still recruiting high school players. You are still targeting a certain brand of athlete to do certain things. And so and you know the specifics of this, the intricacies more than I do, but there had to have been a good fit in the first place. He's not radically different, right? Like it's not so far.
It is, I will say,
to throw
it
things
is
off.
the most different in its purest form, talking about what, I learned over the last week or so watching Oklahoma State. There is more difference here, potentially, than, Bob Shoop to Brent Pry, obviously. Or Brent Pry to Manny Diaz, or Manny Diaz to Tom Allen. Like there are more differences here potentially from a player is not used to doing X on a regular basis. And it is really just on the D line.
What about Dan Lynn?
That was more traditional Penn State. And I did not study deeply Danton Lynn because of the way all of that went down. It didn't get to a point where it was like, okay, we now have to hit the initial sequence of launch. So, but watching his defenses and watching what they do, that was much more of that Brent Pry style of coverages and alignments and things like that. Jim Knowles is in that branch, but there are variations that have developed over time that are the sticking point in the conversation of, why, and here we are now. He is at Penn State. Is that part of the why, or is that an evolution? Ryan brings this up, and I think there's a good part here that I want to take from this. He says, I think that his time at Ohio State and his understanding of the difference between the Big 12 and the Big 10 means he has grown and adjusted to the difference in athletes and scheme. We get to benefit from his time at Ohio State. I think the understanding the league part is true, but I still think it's an open question as to whether or not the scheme evolved or was kind of like put through the cookie press at Ohio State.
I think that there's also an element here that you can see through James Franklin's hires over his tenure of hiring not necessarily to fit what they do. That's a component, and that is it cannot be overlooked, but also what they aspire to be.
Right.
I think that's always been a part of this of, yeah, Manny Diaz. I mean, they couldn't have asked for a more perfect synchronization of timing to be able to get him, but he did things that they aspired to have. The transition from Kirk Shiraka to Mike Yurcich, right, it wasn't about Kirk Shiraka being bad, though the results weren't great. It was about, what does Mike Yurcich do that they can implement and bring into Penn State's offense that will help things, and then getting, moving on from Mike Yurcich. Yeah. Why do that? You do
all
that
in the pursuit of explosive plays, which have been hit or miss for the last 5 years.
Point being, though, is they're not as necessary. They've gotten to the point as a program where incremental steps, which are very hard to do once you get to the top, are still the things that you're seeking out. It's about now getting back to the number one defense in the country,
right?
Which is what, right? But you had that with Manny Diaz. How do you bring that back? How do you get the defense to the point where some of the things that happened this season that were problematic defensively that had not happened the season before, how do you return to that? How do you get that equation back?
There's more to get to here. We have to get to a couple things. We'll put a pin in this conversation and come back to it in just a little bit. But I'm going to do something that might get a copyright strike on us. I don't really know if you're allowed to sing jingles, but I'm going to do it. And I apologize, but also I don't care. Hold on.
Oh no.
Like a good neighbor, Sean Fitz is here. Hello, Sean Fitz. Doing some things pre-show to help out his neighbors, being a good person, and is now on the show. So not that I have a report card or an excuse card, but a well-worthy being late to the show, helping people out. So Fitz, welcome to the show, and you get to talk about beer for the first 2 minutes you're on. When you're ready. How you doing?
That sounds fantastic. Yes, helping neighbors, and then I actually tried to help myself. I had some battery issues this morning, so I had to run over and get that tested, and that took a little longer than I expected, but I got under warranty, got a new battery in the car. So I'm pretty pumped about that. That's 40-year-old dad things you get excited for. But I also, as a 40-year-old dad, get excited for beer. And Anti-Fragile Brewing in State College has me excited for beer because it is my favorite beer in State College. It is my favorite place to hang out in State College. And it is my favorite. Don't tell any of the other sponsors this, but it's my favorite sponsor because of the way that they do things, the genuine hellos and good to see yous when you walk in from not just the bartenders, the owners, whoever, but the crowd that hangs out there is very, very much in line with what we do here at Blue White Illustrated. So we appreciate them as a sponsor. We appreciate them as a local entity in State College. They are downtown State College, Calder Way. And it is a great spot to hit, whether it's winter, spring is coming. It is supposed to be 50 degrees in State College today. I'm not sure if we're going to open up the outside there, as you see on the YouTube, but they've got the John Johns out there going. It's a great smell. It's a great atmosphere. It's a great everything. So Anti-Fragile Brewing, just check it out. If you're in town for a basketball game, a hockey game, any sort of thing that brings you on the pilgrimage to State College, this is a place you want to check out. So check it out as soon as possible. Wonderful beer, wonderful kombucha, wonderful mixed drinks, and a wonderful group of people and atmosphere. And that includes us, right, Nate? We like to frequent there as well. It's great. Like we just go in there and people say hi and they don't even know you and they just start talking. It's like a beach bar. It's great.
If I may,
You may.
Sunday dinner provided by John's.
There you go.
And honestly, like, I don't want to put anybody else to shame, so I won't name names here, but we got a pizza and specifically went out of our way for dinner last night to also get a cheesesteak from John. We could have gotten a cheesesteak at the place we got the pizza, but why do that when the best cheesesteak in State College is mere blocks away?
My parents were up last week to watch my kids. I had to go run an errand out of town.
Wow.
And we went out to breakfast that on Friday morning, and it was big breakfast, great breakfast. And like an hour or two later, we're getting ready to leave, and I was like offhand just like made a joke to my dad about going to get a cheesesteak, and he's like, "I'm in." And this was like an hour after breakfast, so like no possible way to have lunch. But yeah, those cheesesteaks, they have a desirable draw from a lot of people. They're really good.
Do you know what it is that I narrowed things down? And sorry, we can move on to you, Frank. I know you have other things to talk about. It's the pepper. There's pepper in the cheesesteak. They put pepper on it, and you can taste it, and it's distinctive, but it changes things up, and it's really good. And I got the double chin to prove it. So.
All right. Well, Nate, you can that I can't. You got to go out on that. That's a high note. You got to go down on the high note.
We're gonna get waitresses and bartenders. Goodbye.
We're gonna get into Fitz's recruiting update. He'll be back for the mailbag. So we had a very brief January when it comes to the recruiting trail because of the deep run in the college football playoff, but that doesn't mean it wasn't important. And of course, Penn State wrapped up its final junior day of January on February 1st because calendar. So Fitz, what's going on with Penn State football? Lots of news on the recruiting front coming out of there this weekend. Give us the highlights of what we're going to discuss in further Thursday's recruiting show later on this week.
Yeah, another busy weekend for Penn State with a junior day on Saturday. Started a little bit early. Jake Krull, defensive end from IMG Academy, was in on Friday. He's a guy that's pretty high on the board for Penn State, so nice to get him in town, get him involved. Penn State, I guess, jockeying for an official visit right there from Krull. The thing that I'll say is defensive end board, like you think 12 months ago and you think now, it's very different. There's a lot of guys, especially in region, that can fill out the defensive end and defensive line board for Deion Barnes. So I think that's important to note. A good group of players on hand this weekend. I think probably a little bit smaller than we grew to expect coming in because there was just two weekends for Penn State to host. But Connor Salmon made it back. Messiah Hampton from New York did not make it. He went to Miami instead. So you've got a couple of updates on some of the top receivers on the board right there. I know that some guys are cutting it down. Salmon, you look at Penn State, Notre Dame, Clemson, and those are the three that jump out right away. And I think they're very similar programs for obvious reasons, and you've got a lot of good options there. But getting him back, getting him at Bullis, he's from Northern Virginia, but he's now going to the Bullis School in Maryland. I think that's helpful. You've got some connections there with the staff. You've had some guys that have had success, including Penn State's, of course, kickoff man, Gabe Nwosu, has had some success at Penn State. So a solid weekend. We were watching Marlon Bright, the offensive tackle from New Jersey, as a potential commit. He did not pull the trigger. In talking and getting feedback, I don't think Penn State really expected him to be there yet. But I do think Penn State made another pretty good impression on him. Another guy that popped up this weekend, Ben Congdon, is on the rise. Offensive tackle from Ohio. It was very, very funny to see him post a picture. And I think the smallest guy in the picture, outside of Frank Leonard, the smallest guy in the picture was James Franklin. James Franklin's about 6'2". Yeah. Trout looked very small. Ben Congdon's very large. His family is very large. So another guy that kind of fits the mold of what Trout has been looking for. Those big guys, can they move? Well, we will find out. He just went down to Miami, just went down to Florida, went to Indiana the day after Penn State. So well-traveled in the last couple of weeks of January was Ben Congdon. Other than that, I think you're just kind of getting into the dead period right now. Guys are moving on, and, we're watching a couple of guys for this sort of this sort of rollout for the last couple of weeks, or excuse me, for the next couple of weeks.
Can I jump in here just quickly?
Absolutely, can.
To talk about Ben Congdon and what you said there about Penn State's offensive linemen, especially at tackle. Are we at a point now where it feels like we've established the blueprints, 6'6" plus, long arms, potential to grow into the frame, etc. Can guys play at the position if they are not that size? And I mean this in terms of the development of Penn State's ability to recruit preferences. I'm it's a bit of a leading question. I feel like I know your answer, but at the same time, I think it's something to address. Of, has Penn State reached a certain threshold of they can be picky and choosy about who they want at that tackle position, and then recruit certain guys that, have maybe not that fluid positional fit of 4 to 5 positions like they had previously?
Yeah, the top rated player in the 2026 committed class right now is Kevin Brown, who we list as an interior offensive lineman, probably because he is 6'4.5", 6'5", somewhere in there, and he does not have the longest arms in the world, but he's got that athleticism. He's got those feet that move him really well. We got listed at 6'5", 250 right now. I'm not sure the last time he was on campus. I'll have to check on those numbers, but he's number 23 in the country per on 3 as an interior offensive lineman. But Penn State's going to play him a tackle. Like, he's got the ability to do so. He's worked out a tackle. That was when kind of, fell for Kevin Brown, was that mini camp the summer before last, when he's playing out there with some pretty good players. Like that was Cooper Cousins' class, and he was hanging right in there with those guys. Amazingly talented kid who's going to continue to grow. But yeah, they can do that. But you look at what they've done over the last couple of cycles, and I mean, they've gotten bigger across the board. That includes interior guys as well. I mean, you're taking guys that are, 6'5" and playing in the interior. Mm-hmm. And I think you've got a lot to like about the way that Trout has built his room. And you said, can he be selective? Absolutely. I think he's been that way. Maybe going back to 2023 with the Donka class and Javen Williams and those guys. So you can be selective at that point. You got another guy that just got into the program in Owen Alasini, who's 6'8" or just cresting 6'8", 260. So you're kind of in, like, I don't know if a prototype is the word, but like big and long, like that. Yeah. That's what you want on the outside there, and that's what Troutline has been able to find. You look in 2026, a guy like Grayson McHugh makes a lot of sense from Pennsylvania, from LaSalle. So I think that, yes, you're finding yourself in that situation where you can be picky, you can be choosy. I mean, he was out last week on the road visiting guys that, Penn State hasn't been mentioned with, but if he's visiting them for a reason, especially at this time of year. So you can sit down, maybe do an in-home visit, do an in-school visit or whatever. And if you're going to take the time to do that, that means they've taken the time to at least, patronize you or act interested. So
right.
It'll be interesting to see when they get to the summer, which guys are going to get official visits. I think that's probably the litmus test here. You've got Kevin Brown in the class. You saw Tyler Merrill commit to Notre Dame last week, which really wasn't a huge surprise if you were following that one the whole time. But yeah, I think you've got you found a situation where Phil Troutline is kind of in his groove, and I think that's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, and to me, what struck me here with Ben Congdon is 6'7", 270, not ranked by most of the recruiting services. And I know everyone is all on Emmanuel Iheanacho, who is in the region, one of the top prospects, a guy who was big early. But I think at this point, what should lead us is Troutline's evaluation, as opposed, because he seems to be able to identify these guys like Owen Alasini who show up at campus and have all the metrics and can move. And like, there's just a certain impressiveness of his recruiting evaluation and his talent evaluation at the position that I think is, and not to say that we're doing it wrong on our side, because when you're big and you are that big early, it is a part to be, in the thing. I'm sorry, I'm going on and just saying, like, you should probably trust his evaluation because he's been good at finding these guys for a couple years now.
That's the best thing I think he does, is he sticks to that evaluation. And sometimes you got to take, guys if they're in state or something like that, but he sticks to the evaluation, and he ends up with guys that more often than not, look like they have potential. Somebody mentioned Ethan Boyer in the chat. But Egan's got great potential, man. Like, he's got, like, as I think we said it before he enrolled, like, if you get to where he can be a first round pick because of all the traits that he has. And he had a really good freshman year. And also, hey, they don't need him to play right away. Like, especially because he's 280 pounds or whatever he is now, which on a 6'8" frame, still looks pretty skinny. So, but yeah, you've found those guys and you've been able to go out and sort of cultivate an offensive line culture, room culture that's really good. You'd credit guys like Nick Dawkins, Venge Iwane, those guys. Like, it's really good. My dog agrees. But yeah, it's been a really good change.
There's a lot of stuff coming out. By the way, I want to get to this. We haven't talked about this yet on the show, and it's a very important time for news and information because we're getting into spring football, winter conditioning, all of that stuff. And I know it feels like we're in the middle of the off season. There is no such thing as the off season, especially when your season goes into January. So subscribe right now to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for just $1. It is $1 for a week of access. And then, of course, you can get into the site for a full year if you'd like after that. We got the best news, intel, information, content all across Penn State football to keep you informed and keep your insatiable appetite for Penn State football satiated throughout the offseason, which I said at the beginning of this is absolutely not a thing. There is no such thing as the offseason. By the way, if you're listening on the podcast version, I've been meaning to say this for like 6 months. If you're listening, especially on the Apple podcast, if you like, subscribe, and leave a comment, interact with it. It helps us grow that side of things quite a bit, which we don't ignore. It's just that we do this show live, so we're focusing on the video side, but we absolutely want you guys to be a part of the conversation as well. Fitz, what else from recruiting this weekend do you want to get to here before we jump back into the mailbag?
Penn State offered Ashton Blatt, a defensive end from Pittsburgh Central Catholic, a really good player, a guy that was kind of on our radar this past month as a guy. You look at his junior film and he started to blow up. And Penn State, I was curious if they're going to get him on campus. They did so this weekend. They offered him. So again, we go back to what we were saying earlier about that defensive end board, especially in the region being pretty good. Well, you add another one here, and Penn State, I don't want to say learn lessons with Bradley Gompers, but like this is an opportunity maybe where you get this offer out now and it changes some direction in the recruiting. Not sure how it's going to work out with the board there, because like I said, there's some really, really good players out there in the state, in the region, at that position. And I don't want to say you're not going to have room for them all, because it never really comes down to that, but like it might be a race at that position, which is really interesting when you take a look at sort of past instances. So you've got that. We didn't talk last week. We talked about Andrew Olish getting 5 stars from On3 on Thursday. We didn't talk about some other guys that landed some upgrades there. We got 12 4 stars in the class right now, and then Olish is a 5-star. LeVar Arrington II, Matthew Otten, Deshaun Burnett, and Tyke Hayes all making it up to a 90 rating, a 4-star rating on 3. I'm a fan of all of those guys, and I think that's pretty cool to watch, sort of that development and the trends. Really, if you're trending up at the end of the cycle, I think that's a very good sign, especially for some of those guys that have enrolled. Still curious on the immediate impact of that 2025 class. Still curious how many guys would be needed to make an immediate impact on that 2025 class. Of course, people are going to jump right to wide receiver. And Matthew Otten's a guy that, I'm very, very high on, but I'm just curious how quickly those guys can break through. Tyke Hayes, you got his profile up there right now. Ran well when he got into the program, and impressed back in that little bowl practice. I guess playoff practice is what we call it now. But yeah, that's an interesting one to me. And we're going to talk about meeting the redshirt freshman / sophomore, the 2024 class that just went through their freshman year at Penn State. And like Tyke Hayes, I'm curious how this running back room feels with basically unexpected returns from Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. So all of a sudden you went from, oh man, how are they going to replace these guys, to how are we going to get everybody carries because there's so many guys in that room? I think that's very fascinating to watch. And I include Tyke Hayes on that because I think he's a guy that I don't know that he could go out and be a freshman sensation, but I think he can play as a freshman. So which is a very high.
He's already 210 pounds, and he's a guy that physically looks like he could play the position, even though as a freshman, there's always room to grow from a physical standpoint in Chuck Losey's system, but he's not 180 pounds with a ton of room to grow. He's 210 pounds with room to refine. It feels like after seeing him in person and after watching what he's done in high school. So at least from that physical side, it then depends on opportunity and assimilation into everything in the offense, which I think is a fair point to that running back room. And, the diversity and the depth that you can use to maybe push it a little bit more in 2025 in terms of using as many running backs as you want.
Yeah, and that's a long season. So you're kind of playing out how do you protect Nick and Katron, but how do you also, get Cam Wallace back involved? How do you get those redshirt freshmen? I mean, the redshirt freshmen to me are the sort of the most important guys to keep engaged, because Corey Smith's got to get bigger. Quentin Martin wants to be involved, but at the same time, you're bringing back 2 veteran guys who are clearly far and away starters. But if they spend a year, those 2 guys spend a year and, on the back burner, that's going to be tough to handle. And now all of a sudden you're losing Katron and Nick after next year, and you're putting yourself at risk of losing 1 or 2 of those freshmen or those redshirt freshmen. So this is a room, running back in general. Like, I think you get it, because you get sort of the personality it takes to play the position is, that's a room that could be stacked with, I think 7 scholarship guys this year.
Yeah.
Or all of a sudden it could just be gone. So
what we saw when Nick Singleton and Katron Allen joined the program and basically evacuated the room because everyone else wanted to play and the younger guys were getting more time.
Yeah, and that's not a hint. That's not a hearing that in the background. That's just like numbers. That's what I'm talking about. And I don't want people to get that mixed up, because those guys are back and they're going to work hard, and it's going to be really interesting to watch, especially with Cam Wallace coming off that injury. Brutal injury. Yeah.
Want more information on recruiting? Of course, we'll have our Thursday show, but BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is where you want to go right now and always to get more information, including conversation about that on the Blue White Illustrated message board. Speaking of Nate, I jumped the gun, bringing Nate back in for one quick conversation, then we got to get to the mailbag. Fitz hinted on it earlier. We are going to get a chance to talk to these redshirt freshmen now in the official turning of the page ceremony that happens in February. So, expecting that. We talked about what we want to know with Jim Knowles. What are you guys interested in? And Nate, I'm going to start with you with the first chance to get to talk to the freshman class, and because I know during the bowl season, the playoff season, everyone's made available. So, I guess, Nate, what's your outlook on that in terms of what you're interested in? And is this the first time you're getting to talk to these guys?
Yeah. The top 2 receivers in the room just left. So you have to imagine that the guys who didn't feel there's an opportunity, right? And so I think just exploring with Josiah Brown, Peter Gonzalez, obviously coming off of an injury, a tough injury, and then Tyzier Denmark, right? Is what do those guys foresee for themselves? How comfortable are they? How much progress do they feel like they made this past season, right? Kind of working, well, in Denmark's case,
as in front of behind the scenes as you can be, as close to the starting line as you can get without being on it.
Right. And then obviously Josiah Brown coming off an injury in high school. The second year is always better than the first. So all 3 of those guys are going to be, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, Tyzier Denmark's going to say, yeah, I'm going to start, and that's just necessarily what's going to happen. It's just about how do they feel they have evolved and progressed through 1 year in the program. And honestly, Drew, right, is having that consistency of what, to whatever extent it was, right? Drew talked about this past summer working with those guys and feeling as though Peter Gonzalez had come to Penn State ready to play. He was intent on playing, whether anybody else felt that way or not. That was the mindset that he brought to Penn State. Obviously, things got cut short for him in August, but all right. Drew Aller has a relationship with him, right? Like Drew Aller has that is a working connection that now has the opportunity this offseason to blossom a little bit more.
Fitz, what about you? What are you interested in when we get the chance to talk to them?
Everything, honestly. Like, this is one of the most not exciting. I'm sports
intriguing.
Intriguing availabilities of the year, because I sat down with Anthony Donka last year for 10 minutes, and it was very engaging. It was very much a window into the type of preparation that he can provide. Like, I think there's something to that. Like, there's something to these conversations. You get a look in at the character. You get a look at the sort of the mindset that these guys have. And I'm excited to see, guys like Egan Boyer, who I talked to as a recruit, but like, he's going to be very different than he was as a recruit. Like, this is going to be a maturation phase that is very intriguing. Anthony Specca has always been more mature than the rest of his class. So as a guy that could be on the verge of battling for a spot in that 2 deep, like, that's very interesting to me. Nobody has asked more questions about a freshman than Liam Andrews, who did not play this year, obviously. So like, get his mindset where he's at after dealing with that injury for the entire season. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in trimmings then later today on the site at blueillustrated.com. Dejan Lane, like, we don't think of him as a freshman totally, but he's going to be a guy that is going to be a big part of this defense next year. I think probably the most interesting thing to me is, like, you look at the varying stages of guys in their career. Like, Dejan Lane, all of a sudden, he played this year. So he's a guy that we feel is a little bit older than the rest of his group. Denmark, we've been talking about for a long time, but he's a redshirt freshman who needed, a lot of things on field, off field to happen before.
Cooper Cousins is a part of this group, right? Like that, to put it, what you're saying in context.
I totally forgot about Cooper Cousins because I don't think of him as a freshman because he's been around so long that you don't think about that. But yeah, there's just so many interesting storylines and interesting guys that can make an impact on the 2025 group. And, and a bunch of guys that can probably say the same thing about 2026. I was thinking about those defensive ends. Yes, Max Granville and Jalen Harvey got on the field this year and did a pretty good job for freshmen. What kind of strides can they make in 2025? But how exciting can they be in 2026, the pair and Malachi Williams as well? So, you see the roster building. Like, I'm fascinated by the roster building of all this. Like, this is my, like, going back to recruiting. And you see the pieces, and the pieces are not necessarily going to fit in 2025, but you got to see where those pieces go in 2026, 2027 and beyond.
We are going to get now to your questions. I've been asking these guys, what are they interested in this week and this month? Now we're going to get into what you're interested in with Penn State football heading into the fastest down period in quite some time. Okay, so we're going to start with this one, which is way too early, but I wrote about way too early camp battles 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, just because, as we talked about, the roster is set so we can kind of see these things out in the distance. And Christian Bohan wants to know, what specific position battles are you most eager to see unfold this spring, aside from the wide receiver position? Nate, do you have any in mind now that we're going to know a little bit more by tomorrow about the defensive side with Jim Knowles, hopefully. But what are you generally interested in from the position battle perspective?
I mean, if I don't have to pick one that's there, the receivers.
No. Any position battle. I mean, long snapper, if it were there, I apologize. I don't know if that is a position battle this year.
Well, I'm a rule breaker, and he said aside from the receivers, but yeah, it's the receiver. It's the receivers. Like, I just think that it's so, what are these transfers going to do? Right. What are the guys coming back going to do with it? There's just a lot of unknown. And yeah, the linebacker situation has a lot too. Look, there are, conversations to be had, and this is always fascinating, but who are the players who come back from injury? Are they the same guy that they were before injury? How much did the injury that they sustained throw them off of development?
This is like, I annoy my wife with this question. She's a personal trainer, not that she's just a random person. Like, she has some insight into these things. And I just, every year I'm like, hey, so I know you don't know the injury, but like, what's the timeline here? What's the progress? Because these things, 2025, everything that happens starts, the impact of it starts now in February, really. Yeah.
So that's, I'm cheating and saying receiver. Fitz,
what about you?
I'm just fascinated by that safety spot. Like, who's going to surround Zakee Wheatley? How do you fit those in? How do these actual positions play out in terms of the skill sets they have? We talked to Dejan Lane, but you talk Vabu Toure, Antoine Belgrave Shorter, Lamont Payne, and how these younger guys will come in and sort of have to establish themselves. I don't know if that's probably not the best way to put that, but you're taking a big jump. Whenever someone plays as many snaps as Jalen Reed and Zakee Wheatley, and and to an extent in 2023, KJ Winston played, you're going to have, I don't want to call him a step back, but you're going to have a transitional period. And for a position that's important as that, and King Mac's back in the fold as well, but for a position as important as that, like, how does that all play out? So I think that just finding your safeties, finding the guys that can handle, whether it be their second defense in 2 years, their third defense in 3 years, how do you handle all that? And how do you just sort of put it in order and play off of the strengths of your strong positions, which we still think corner's pretty good, even though, Jalen Kimber moved on, but how do you play off of those positions and sort of hybridize this entire thing?
I'm just pulling this up right now. I apologize, but Jalen Reed, 1,865 snaps on defense over the last 3 seasons. Nobody's had more snaps over the last 3 years. And Zakee Wheatley is right behind him. So you bring one of those guys with a lot of snaps back, but then there is a big gap between him and the next player on the list. So yeah, just from a development perspective, the on-field side of the development perspective, Jalen Reed has been the guy on the field. So somebody has to start accumulating the next largest snap total outside of Zakee Wheatley. I think that's a really good point. This is a niche one. I'm interested in the center battle for the future, because the conversation has been that Cooper Cousins is the center of the future since he stepped on campus. And I'm not trying to contend that, but they also haven't had any other options on the roster that have been manifesting themselves. And I think TJ Shanahan can be a part of that conversation. So how does all that play out? I think the seeds of that it will all be decided when it's decided down the road, when it's actually here. But the jockeying and showing you can do the job, and they have a history of getting the next guy prepared for it before it starts, and that would be this year. Who's the guy in the non-conference season that is getting those snaps, to give Nick Dawkins a blow early on in the first month of the year? So I think that's going to be when we see the start of early on, to know what the plan is for the future, because that can then inform, where's Cooper Cousins, and then we'll fill in around after that. It's kind of the mentality I think everybody has. And I just don't think it's locked in that it's center like we have thought previously. Fitz, this one here, another World Lion. I want to move on to a different one. I apologize for double clutching, but I went out of order, and I promised I wouldn't do that to you guys this week. Strengths of the defense. Just get into this as a general conversation. Where are the position strengths of the defense in 2025? Who will be the standout star on defense everyone's talking about going into the playoffs? Whew, that is a long way away. But what do you think the positional strengths are as they sit right now, Fitz?
I think there's more positional strength in individuals than there are in entire groups. You look at last year, probably a little bit more complete, or at least a little bit more known. I mean, getting those guys back at defensive tackle was absolutely massive. And then eventually you saw at the end of the season, like, how much depth matters at that position. So defensive tackle is going to be a spot where you have to build up and you have to work around it. And that's where guys like stars like Zane Durant and Denai Dennis Sutton come in. I think Denai is on board for a potential takeoff here. He's going to be maybe the most important defensive player on Penn State's roster, although I'm going through and I'm just like, well, I can make an argument for AJ Harris. I can make an argument for Zakee Wheatley. I can make an argument for a lot of these guys, just because we don't know what the general structure is going to be and how much they're going to be asked. I caught some of your conversation a little bit earlier about Jim Knowles, and the crux of it to me was, hey, Ohio State had so much talent, they didn't have to do a ton, because they, like, when you can get home with 4, it makes everything easier. I feel that way about the entire defense. So in a rebuilding year, and I think Penn State's stocked the cabinet pretty well in terms of things that they can work around. But in a retooling year, or reloading, or whatever you want to call it, like, it's going to be, some of the things are going to have to work themselves out. So I look at the stars and say those guys can make it. I look at Zakee Wheatley, who just finished the season so strongly. I mean, it was really an unbelievable finish, and he did it in the sense that he got his hand on the football, which was a criticism all year long for this defense. And now you get Jim Knowles, who's been pretty good about getting turnovers as well. So I don't know that I look at one spot and just say it's that head and shoulders above anything else, but they got a lot of work to do on defense. corner still should be fine. Like defensive end should still be fine. Getting Smith Filbert back is a big deal. Defensive tackle you're gonna have to work through, and linebacker as well.
Nate, I got another question for you.
Can I say Tony Rojas real quick?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah. He's the strength of the defense specifically.
I don't know about strength of the defense, but the guy that people are going to talk about going into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. He can be, yeah.
And I mean, Denai is obvious. Zane is obvious. Zaki is obvious. But I just last summer, Chuck Losey talked about Tyler Warren and becoming the greatest tight end to ever play at Penn State, and everybody's kind of, okay. He talked about Tony Rojas the same way, and I think a fully recovered, not injured Tony Rojas in year 3 will be very good at playing football, whether people believe that or not. I just think that guys that do things the right way and put in the effort the way that he has demonstrated he does, good things typically come.
Yep. Sorry. I'm just so glad that somebody else is saying it other than me for once. I remember.
I'll live on that ledge with you, buddy. You know that.
I mean, he's got incredible talent. He's just got to stay healthy. He's in a sling right now, which is, postseason cleanup, which is typical. But if he's able to play healthy, he's got as much talent as anybody this side of Abdul Carter on the defense last year in terms of athleticism.
I remember
all that stuff.
The conversation about Kobe King at that point in his career was a lot of the same. And I just see guys, we just collectively, and I'm not saying
can I just
we don't give them an opportunity to get better. Like we don't give guys, he showed something as a freshman that flashed in these very specific moments. And because of that, he entered this past season with all of these super high expectations that weren't misplaced, but he very obviously got hurt at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me kind of explain what I saw from him last year. And some of the criticisms about Tony Rojas is that he doesn't know how to read it, that he doesn't have instincts for the position, or he doesn't have the ability to play in the box or any of those things. Those are misunderstanding the situation. There is not having instincts, and there's not having the ability to execute the assignment. So when you're injured and you're a linebacker and you've got to take on blocks with a certain side of your body, but that side of the body doesn't work. James Franklin talked about it with Anthony Donko about how you've got to learn how to adapt and play within your new normal. And if you've never had to do that before, it is a learning process. By the end of the season, we saw him being better about that. But when we talk about Tony Rojas, I remember we met him and we met that class, and one of the comments that came out of that particular freshman availability was he's a football savant, was the quote I remember that stuck with me. Of he was playing basically 2 positions, but they fast tracked him to play the will because he was good at football and understood and could handle playing in the box. The translation of that was the problem because of the injury and the youth. And then maybe a loss of confidence because you're struggling for the first time in your career. And to Nate's point, we don't allow people to go through things and give them the benefit that they'll get better, both physically and mentally, because we all are in a rush to judge and dismiss so that we can have a certain amount of information that we have to know and then dismiss everything that we don't. But watching him on film, I never felt like he had a lack of instinct or he didn't know where the ball was going or where he was supposed to be. It was about the execution of the assignment because of all the things that we just outlined. So sorry, I couldn't help myself. This is a general conversation point on top of that about can you play in the spring and if you're injured or the spring in general. Matt Rule may be very well canceling Nebraska's spring game. Could you see this being something that is followed by others? What are the top pros and cons of that? Nate, I want to come back to you. This feels like a good Nate conversation.
Yeah, so it's not about injury. This is fascinating on multiple levels. Matt Rule, the purpose behind his comments were his players being poached, that he doesn't want to put it on film. And that's legit. I actually had a conversation with a coach this past weekend about playing young guys and there being a sentiment, I would say, within coaching. It's a balancing act, right? But people are constantly concerned, and there's always this murmur about young players not being able to play to get in and then leaving. The opposite side of that, and this is like the stuff that nobody says, is coaches feeling like, well, one, you haven't earned a pathway to the field necessarily, right? You're not better than the guy in front of you as a true freshman necessarily. If you're not, why are you going as a coach? You're hurting yourself then putting them on film, giving them an opportunity to generate film for themselves so that they can leave. So I do think that is a piece of what Matt Rule is saying, but there's a secondary piece of it of college football is just changing broadly. This is a different conversation for a different day, but like college football players are becoming pro football players. Pro football players don't do 15 spring practices with a game at the end of it. Yeah. And college football players don't want to do that anymore. So
this is, I think, an important difference is that those are professional football players who play football full time, and they're studying and they're training, and that's their job. At some point in the process, the education of football does need to take precedent. And I'm not trying to argue for, hey, let's let coaches do whatever they want with players and, use them up so that they're ready to go in the fall, but they don't have a future. But there is an aspect of this where the NFL tackling got worse for a while before they learned how to adapt the schedule to try and teach tackling in a different way. This is a more fundamental level of you've got to learn the fundamentals of the position. And if you're taking that time away and not putting it back in with young players, development will slow. I think this is a zero-sum situation. Do you agree with that? And is there a balance between spring football, padded practice, and some sort of off-season getting better at football progression that can happen in the future?
I mean, I think it's possible because you look at what they've done with the amount of time they're able to spend with coaches, and that does not necessarily mean in pads. Like, you can do a lot in terms, we're talking about installation of a new defense this spring. You're talking about last year, a new offense. You can do a lot without putting the pads on. And I think that there's been elevations in the time spent there, but also no alterations to that spring calendar where you still get 15. And here's the thing, like, if Notre Dame and Ohio State and whoever else is getting 15 practices, well, if you choose not to do 15 practices, you're putting yourself behind. So until there's fundamental change at a national level, like or a conference level or something like that, it's not going to change, because if you do, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball. It's one of those reasons that those bowl practices were so important, is not necessarily playing in the Ticket City Bowl, but playing with the guys that were going to be your team next year. And now it's less, the postseason is less about a jump into the next season as it is to sort of, just find yourself in a finite solution to your current season.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of that leads to a union to negotiate on the other side, because the institution is not going to want to give up what it has already. And I think that's fans don't want to see the modernization of it. And I think that would be one of the biggest things that happens that would cause an uproar. But I don't think we're far off from it. Nate, what do you got?
I was just going to say, I think if you listen to James Franklin talk about preseason, right, and it's kind of like dancing around the subject a little bit, but that's where that might go, right, is actually have a preseason game or two, right, against whatever, any opponent. And so the calendar itself is so messed up currently. I think it will demand a broad rethinking of how all of this should operate. And I think that it will get to that point. You have seen, for the first time in college football in a long time, again, something that James Franklin talks about, like, the last 5 years have been the biggest changes in college football in 50 years. Well, if that's the vibe, if the vibe is, hey, college football is willing collectively to enact change, that tenor has been set. There is an atmosphere in which people can come together, figure some stuff out, figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how this is going to adjust moving forward. And again, I do think that with or without representation, which they don't have right now, college football players are going to have a seat at that table. There's going to be
you can see their influence right now, right?
Correct.
Like you can see their influence on the number of lawsuits and litigation that have gone opposite of the NCAA. And there's just not an official, like there's no official person or board or anything to codify what they already have, which is power. And I think, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, you've already seen it change with eligibility things, right? In terms of guys being granted a 5th year or 6th year or whatever it is, right? Being able to transfer to certain places that they want. All of those things have been hands forced by individual players, collections of players, whatever, right? Whatever the circumstances are for those individual situations, there is a power to that I think is starting to be realized. And together with the conferences, the whatever, right? They're all going to have to rethink how this operates. And I have some level of, with or without that commissioner of college football, right? That changes will be made that will benefit, honestly, everybody.
And we are going to track that. Nate's going to track it. I'm not going to.
Yeah, I will.
At BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
I'll let you guys know.
Fitz brings up a whole new show topic here, which we're not going to get to today. Super Bowl food. The Super Bowl is probably my second favorite holiday of the year behind Christmas. It is both happy and sad. I'm going to watch it, which is not where I was previously, but we'll talk about maybe Thursday. We'll bring up Super Bowl food and everything on the show. But that's it for today. So Sean, Fitz, Nate Bauer, thank you so much for your contributions to the show. As always, the conversation continues at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Fitz gave you an idea of what he's going to be writing for trimmings earlier in the show. Rewind that, listen, and get that foreshadowing. Nate Bauer, of course, talking about the big picture stuff in college football. But we'll be getting to all of that and more. Of course, Jim Knowles' press conference tomorrow. We'll have a live replay of that moments after it concludes right here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, which is to say, subscribe and like the video and all those other things that we do here for clicks on the internet, because we need it to keep the ship afloat in February. And more than anything, appreciate the fact that we had so many people here on a day we weren't supposed to be live, and we gave you minimal updates on that. So thank you so much for working with us. We'll be back tomorrow with Jim Knowles' press conference. We'll talk to you then.